on the process of identity development in the Afghan 1.5 generation youth. And she's particularly interested in understanding concepts of identity, cultural influence, and its impact on mental health. She largely focuses on refugee and migration issues, and as an Afghan herself, she's committed to contributing research on the Afghan community and ways in which stigmas on mental health and psychology can be overcome. So a really important topic. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Yes, so I want to give a little bit of background information about myself, because with the study that I conducted over a period of 2 years, it was very important to kind of think a little bit about the context that each participant was coming with. So I was born in Afghanistan. I have a refugee background, so I came to the UK when I was about 4 years old. I was raised in England and I studied here as well. And of course, I'm working at the moment. And one more. Okay. So the aim of this study essentially is to think a little bit about sharing the voices and narratives of Afghans living in the UK, but most importantly, working with the youth. As I was doing my literature review, I noticed that there's not much research on those who are from, Afghan backgrounds, but young, living in the UK, part of the diaspora, and also their narratives of identity development. So hopefully this research was able to kind of share the narratives of belonging, identity, and how their identities have been impacted by others' influence. And of course, ideally to highlight the need for kind of a culturally sensitive intervention and communication, particularly within the mental health sector, which is a huge gap which I've noticed whilst working with the Afghan community in the NHS, privately, and also within charities. And also to reflect on the impact that institutions and society members have on the hardships. So they kind of exacerbate the hardships when it could be made easier. And we can think a little bit about kind of discrimination and assumptions that people have about who the Afghan community is and what they bring to the UK, essentially. The key kind of takeaway points from this study was that our narratives have been dominated by those who tell us who we are or who we should be. So we haven't had much of a chance to kind of say, this is who I am as an Afghan, this is my story, this is what I represent, this is what I believe in, and this is what I need from the UK or from the community that I'm living here now and trying to integrate with. And those experiences have been very heavily influenced, of course, by the wider community and the host country. So there is, again, what I was saying about how welcoming the host society is, what are some of the media perceptions that people often listening about this country, and how that impacts their kind of acceptance and that freedom to be able to freely express themselves. Next one. I'm not going to bore you with the history of Afghanistan, so you can skip this one. So my study essentially focused on 3 different areas. So the identity development in Afghan youth, looking at the process of identity from a psychological perspective, what psychology says about when you start to first develop your sense of who you are and who you want to be, and what your roles are in your family and in society. And then the second part was about the 1.5 generation. So often we hear ourselves talking about first generation and second generation, but there is a gap there too. So the 1.5 generation is those who have come to the UK from the ages of 6 to 12 years old. So that's a very specific age, because that's the age essentially where you are going into schools, you are being educated, and you have a very large influence of the outside world now. So you're not, you're no longer at home. You're being influenced by your peers, your teachers, and other people in society. And I used a narrative analysis, so thinking about the stories. What are people saying through their stories? So their stories of hardship, their stories of challenges, their good stories as well, things that they have enjoyed and kind of found supportive through their identity development. And also the different voices involved in that development as well. So whether there have been significant other people who have kind of shaped who they see themselves as. And largely that has been kind of the media influences, but I'll get to that. And yeah. And obviously we know Afghanistan is very, very diverse. So the stories that we are hearing now in the media is that Afghans are very, very specific, and we kind of know a lot about them. We know who they are, we know what they do in society and how life is back home. But actually we know as Afghans, you know, sitting together today perhaps, that there are a lot of differences too. So we need to be able to say what those differences are without feeling that there's going to be discrimination or kind of a pushback on that. Thank you. So 3 key kind of narratives came from this study. So we've had a huge narrative was about being the activist. So what I mean by that was many of the participants started to say how much they wanted to do for back home. So now as an adult, after having experienced the development of identity, they wanted to go back to Afghanistan, they wanted to build charities, they wanted to build schools, open mosques, do so much for their homeland. And they felt that they had to do this because nobody else was doing it for them. So everyone in the society, in their host country, was kind of saying, you have to work harder, we can't help you, we don't have the resources, you need to do this for yourself. And so a lot of these stories were about, well, if no one else is going to do it for me, I have to do something about this. So they became really educated, getting their masters, getting their PhDs, their doctorates, and making sure that they can have the resources to be able to then go back to Afghanistan and rebuild their lives. I obviously want to say that this study was completed just before the fall of Afghanistan. So obviously, if I was to go back and interview every single participant in that study, they will all have a different narrative now about what they can do and what they want to do. The second kind of narrative that came out was this idea of poor Afghans or being discriminated against, and how much they had to build on their sense of resilience, become really strong, and work across with kind of the discrimination, the biases, the assumptions. They couldn't let that impact their stories. So they were saying, people, when we first came as refugees, they saw us as being poor Afghans. Oh, they've lost their country, they don't have an identity, they're going through so much. And it was very much through the lens of pity rather than real empathy. And this idea was being pushed back on. So as adults, they came to a sense of, nope, I need to be resilient. No one is going to support me through this process. If, again, I don't do it, who else is going to kind of stand up for my community and for my people? And lastly, kind of the narratives of educational institutes. So how much of an impact your educational institute has on your sense of identity. So what I heard through the stories was this idea of they found themselves being threatened even in institutions. I'll share a little bit of the quotes in just a minute, but the institutes need to work harder in making sure they're not part of this kind of discriminative narrative, and they're not pushing their own agendas on people who want to break away or free from those agendas. And obviously there's a conflict between building your identity at home and then going out to schools and being told that this is how to be British. You have to be British at school, you have to be British in the workplace. And when you're at home, you're Afghan and your parents tell you kind of what to do whilst you're growing up. You've got your own set of rules and ways of being. Things such as simple as like taking off your shoes, when you're at home, and having a foreigner perhaps who's coming to do some work at home and they don't take their shoes off. So we had very kind of short and very simple narratives, but it kind of creates this image of how big of a problem it is and how much of a conflict a lot of the youth face, and how much there is of a misunderstanding and kind of battling or juggling these different identities of, am I British, am I Afghan, am I British Afghan, or am I kind of completely rejecting one identity more than the other? The next slide, thank you. So here you'll see some of the quotes from some of the stories. So from the first part, I'll read it out. I'll read one out. So I see it as part of my duty to help Afghans back home in terms of the key thing is the education, like to bring a good education back home. So this was from a young man who was studying at university, doing his second degree, and his core kind of hope for the future was that he wanted to go back to Afghanistan and create a school or open up a school or have an impact on the educational institute. That was his hope and his dreams. And there's a quote that I'm sure a lot of us have heard before, but one participant said, "For everyone, his country is like Kashmir." And we know that Kashmir is known to be kind of heaven on earth. So for him in particular, he said, "I love the UK, I love being here, I'm very privileged, but at the end of the day, my country is going to be like Kashmir, and that's always going to be the case, whether I'm older and whether I was younger, it doesn't matter." Some of the other quotes, so this other quote is about the impact of educational institutes. So one young lady in her late 20s, she was reflecting on a time back from school. So she said, "After I went back to school, the first thing that one of my classmates asked me was, 'Where are you from?' And I was like, 'Afghanistan.' And they asked, 'Oh, is Osama bin Laden your dad?' And they laughed about it. And this person thought, well, I don't even know who this person is, or I didn't even know what they're talking about. But it's this idea of you're being indoctrinated from such a young age. This is primary school. So a child said this to another child. And this is huge. I mean, we're talking about all the impact of the media. This child was not born racist or kind of with these discrimination in their minds, but somewhere along the line they learned it, and this is where it came from. Another quote from this idea of resilience was this young lady, again in her mid-20s. She was a pharmaceutical student, and she said, "We don't really have an identity. We're just classed under, the forms when you just complete it. We haven't made it there." She was talking about the forms that we complete on a daily basis, where you get to pick what ethnic group you're from or where you're from. Afghanistan is hardly on there, or Afghan is not on there. So she was using that as an example to say, we don't even have kind of a space in the society at the moment. It's so hard to even say where you're from when there's no opportunity to actually share that narrative. And she was laughing about it, but actually I think it's quite intense when you think about, you've lived here, you've worked here, you've studied here, and there's not a space for you to share your story or who you are. Next one. Okay, so the impact for our work as kind of, I guess, a psychologist is thinking about the power dynamics and creating trust within the community to make sure that young people have a space in the therapy room, in the psychological and kind of mental health sector, and knowing that they can trust who they're sitting with. So knowing that their information is truly confidential, they can share their stories, and they don't have to hide it away. They don't have to pretend that they're kind of more British or more Afghan. They can just be who they are. And this is really important for future studies, kind of in terms of managing real life challenges, and kind of especially in the NHS where there is a lack of diversity when we're talking about kind of therapists. I think I'm one of the only therapists, Afghan therapists that I know of in the world, but obviously if you guys know any more, do connect me with them. But it's a very small world, and this has a huge impact against kind of the minority groups and how we show them every single time that there is a space for them and that we are interested in their stories, essentially. My key takeaway point, I guess, is we have to be able to kind of share our narratives in order to begin this process of thinking or reconceptualizing and thinking about the interventions that we want to create in the future for minority groups like the Afghans here in the UK. And to be able to just share your narratives, and you are the experts. We don't want to create this idea that other people know you more than you know yourselves. And that's all, I guess. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for keeping Simon.
I've tried.
We're going to take questions at the ends of each paper, so if you've got any questions for Dr. Avesta, please note them down so you don't forget. And I'm going to hand over now to Assiya Amini. She's a PhD student at Goldsmiths University of London. She's also a peace activist, a film artist, a researcher. She's a co-founder of Afghan Academy International, the founder of Afghan Art, Film and Media Foundation, and Education and Peace Projects.
Slide presentation, which was only made for this room, not to be shared live, and somehow maybe that didn't allow it to load, I don't know. Anyway, I've got the slide on my computer. I'll do it without, and you can watch the slide on my laptop after. Is that the deal? Yeah, so that will maybe ease up a lot of tension for myself, because a lot of the material shared on the slides are not published yet, or I am sharing personal family photos which I don't want to be streamed live or shared without my family's knowledge. So that was only just to share to you where I'm coming from, why I'm doing this work, and where I'm taking you along this presentation. So thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me to be part of today's conference. And I find that these conferences are opportunities for people to increase their networks, but then also to find like-minded people who are actually in sort of great efforts trying to safeguard Afghanistan and its people. And that's one of my research findings that I was going to share with you towards the end. But hey, the presentation is later and you can watch it, of course, and you can see it for yourself. So I will actually follow my notes. I'm a tiny bit going through a deep sort of moments of my life. My mom has sorry to say, but my mom is, maybe I should have not brought it up, but I have to come to terms that she might not be with me. Sorry.
I'm so sorry. Assiya's mom has acute blood cancer, unfortunately, at the moment in the hospital, so we all come prior to her.
Thank you, so sorry. And this is actually something which not only myself, but many people actually around the world who come from Afghanistan or refugee communities go through. The family distance, which is a huge sort of impact emotionally. I thought I could actually present today without having this moment, but we are all human, and maybe that is one of the reasons why I actually ended up doing this research. I have been engaged with the community for over 32 years. Well, in actual fact, since I've been a child, because I left Afghanistan before the Russian invasion. And having lived through the war from outside is even harder than you can imagine. So I'm not even focusing on the slides because they're not there to go through with you. So I'm gonna take it as a whatever comes to my mind to tell you why I ended up actually doing this research. So I never intended to go back to education or put myself through this stress of getting assessed, writing up all of this long, thesis and amounts of workload. But I felt that there was a big gap of understanding what Afghans are going through, the repressed trauma, the mental pressures that has been going on for nearly 5 decades, which is about 3 generations. Your research is complementing a lot, and you are covering a lot of what I'm discussing as well. But my cohort is actually the older generation of Afghans who have left around the Russian invasion time. So I have been knowing my participants for many years, and I found that their stories have never been told. their points of view has never been told. So I'm actually looking at to what peace means to them. May I ask what peace means to you all? Anyone? Does anyone know what peace means to you?
Just be happy with your family in your own home.
And that's not possible for many of us, isn't it?
For me,
So-
at 7 years of age, I haven't seen it.
So, anyone else? Yes?
Yeah, although I sometimes feel physically safe, but mentally I do not feel safe.
So safety.
I cannot, for example, there is a kind of intellectual activity. If I'm in Afghanistan, I cannot do it. Although I feel physically safe, but intellectually there will be.
And yourselves at the back, please. Yes, please.
So peace may mean, may be interpreted in both internal and external side. The internal peace, to my mind, would be a very, kind of harmony between mind and, if you say, spirit and all the body and abilities and thoughts and all things in very meaningful harmony internal. That's the beginning of peace. And if we transfer it between each other, then gradually kind of external peace will be built.
MashaAllah, and I'm really proud you said that, because this is actually capturing exactly what my participants are telling me and what I believe strongly in. If you don't have got an internal peace, how can you actually work for your country? If you don't have got the means to bring us along, how can you actually strive for nation building in Afghanistan? The world has been watching us for 5 decades. Unfortunately, they have, I'm sorry, I'm actually bringing my activist voice here. They have let us down several times. And that's why I felt that I needed to do something just to gain some form of peace for myself, but then also hearing all the stories of the people who have actually, I have helped with as a volunteer as part of my role with the community here. Luckily, I had various different sort of opportunities to become very active, resolve their problems, support them, initiated various different projects based on their needs, because it's only them who can tell us what their needs are. But I had to listen to my own need, and I needed to find a solution as to why the woman who, once I know were the rulers of the house in Afghanistan, and suddenly the woman is being used as a tool to, we can discuss the role of women in society within Afghanistan and everywhere else. I mean, this is a totally separate. But I didn't actually agree with what was being said in the news around the world about my own mother, who was a nursery teacher, and knowing other women in my family who have been active even before the Russian invasion. So I didn't agree and I didn't buy what was being said to me as a young person, as well as a mother, and later on becoming even older and becoming more in sense of what we are actually going through. We are actually going through intergenerational trauma of my family's passed on to me, my own trauma being passed on to my own children, and hence your participants might be actually going through what future generations might be going through. So my research is trying to safeguard all of these missing and lost narratives in search of peace, in order to visualize peace and create the outcomes as a film. I'm working on the edit. It will be out soon, inshallah. And you're most welcome to contact me if there is any more information that you require. But luckily, 2020, one of the major projects of which I'm very proud of, and Rabia John and some others have actually contributed towards it, is the Afghan International Peace Conference and Festival. We used to hold conferences in the past 20 years ago. When 2001, I recall news agents coming to us and interviewing us as to Afghanistan becoming free and there's peace coming and all of that. And we held our conferences. We went through all of this, and yet there's a big jump backwards once again. So it's a constant sort of roller coaster that we have been placed on without our agreement. And this is more or less what I'm trying to sort of say, that everyone can actually make a difference. So we had various different stakeholders involved in the conference, and all their contributions have actually become part of the Afghan Library and Peace Center. It is online, and last year I managed to sort of luckily win a space, arts space, and turned it into an Afghan library, which is in West London. You're most welcome to come and visit. We have got authors, we have safeguarding Afghan books, which we have been sort of collected. I'm a bookaholic. Anyone who has got any publications who wants to come and use the resources is most welcome. And on 21st of September this year, we are going to have a 4th round of taking in new collaborators becoming part of this massive project. And British Council mentioned earlier if we have got any concept notes. Yes, Afghan Library in the UK. It's one of the first first Afghan library, I would say, outside of Afghanistan. And we have a very good selection of books in all languages. In terms of actually the next stage for my own research is actually trying to collect all of these stories, memories and reflections about peace. I did a video art installation in 2013, of which John and Veronica were part of it. And again, 2020, they became part of it again, because we have got various good friends of Afghanistan who actually believe in what Afghanistan consists of. It consists of peace-loving people, people who have always lived in peace and who strive for peace. They had enough. They want peace. It's just the world they need to actually help now to bring on what they promise, and that is more or less, oh, I've got 5 minutes left. Okay, so the next stage, one of my findings was, well, I can't share all of my thesis because it's still in working mode, aiming to finish within the next 3 months. I'm not so sure whether I will manage given my circumstances, but one of my main aims was the lack of safeguarding, the risk assessments of all of these NGOs which have gone to Afghanistan, and we saw what happened. There were no risk assessments placed or created. It was just a disaster. And once again, the world let us down. Afghans who believed in what they thought would bring peace and prosperity for their countries saw once again a dip in a big hole in which they find themselves. Their families stuck in Afghanistan, in other countries, on shores, under sea, God knows where, but there is still no hope for many of these people. So what peace means, how peace looks like, this is more or less what my PhD is about. And if you would like to watch my presentation, because there is a lot of information embedded as part of the presentation to try to visualize where I'm coming from, but I hope I've given you an account of what I wanted to say. If there are any questions, you're most welcome to ask me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And again, if you can note down your questions, we've got one more presentation, hopefully, instead of over Zoom.
Just to give you a brief introduction, what I'm going to present to you is a section of my MPhil thesis that focuses on political memory, identity, and oral poetry among Hazara refugee women in the UK. Today, I'll be presenting a chapter on Hazara women's oral poetry from my research. This is an exclusively interview-based study for which 12 Hazara refugee women in the UK are interviewed. The presentation will proceed in the following order. In the first section, I would like to give a brief background information. This will be followed by a brief explanation or analysis on the significance of oral poetry among the Hazaras. Then to the thesis question, then to the centrality of Dambura in Hazara oral poetry, which then will be followed by exile at oral poetry and a summary of the presentation. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, background information. So, oral poetry occupies a special place in Hazara folklore. These poetries are historically orally transmitted and are considered instrumental in shedding light on the political and social lives of the Hazaras. As a subaltern ethnic group, the Hazaras have historically relied on various styles of oral poetry to express their feelings and hopes on ceremonial occasions, as well as their frustration and grief at the political situation in Afghanistan. Although the authors of these poems are not known, according to indigenous scholars, most, if not all of them, are spoken and composed by Hazara women. Henceforward, Hazara women's oral poetry. Hazara oral poetries are comprised of different stylistic genres, including but not limited to Charbaiti, which is Quatrain, Dubaiti, Hafid, Ghazal, and Ghazal. Charbaiti, which is recognized as the most popular poetry among the Hazaras, has been the only genre that participants in this study recited in the interviews. I'm very sorry for the background noise. I'm actually not. Are there a lot of background noise?
Yeah, there's quite some background.
I'm very sorry. It was very quiet earlier. I don't know what happened. Let me see.
Yeah, go ahead.
I do apologize for that. As I said, Charbaiti is the only genre that participants in this study recited in the interviews. Interestingly, however, none of the participants referred to the Quatrain poetries they shared as Charbaiti. Instead, participants unanimously referred to Hazaragi poetry as Ghazali Azergi or Hazaragi Ghazal. Moving to the next slide, which is the significance of oral poetry. These poetries, in the words of Bamia, are individually authored and collectively received and transmitted such that they become the expression of the feelings and emotions, as well as a medium of mass communication among the Hazaras. These poetries reflect the Hazara people's collective experiences across different historical periods, communicated and representative of a diverse range of voices across various localities, predominantly in rural parts of Hazaristan, the homeland of the Hazaras. Although indigenous scholars such as Kuradi and Mustawi incorporated these poetries in their studies of Hazara people, broadly speaking, however, despite the centrality and significance of these poetries, for and thus far, they have not received much academic attention. In particular, a study of these poems from the standpoint of Hazara women has been neglected. Therefore, the study is a humble attempt to respond to this academic negligence. It's also important to note that in the poems that I will be discussing below, the participants carefully and very selectively recite poems that best reflect their life stories as well as concerns that are inextricably linked to the collective concerns of the Hazaras as a group. These poems are thus not meant to portray the historical suffering of Hazara women, rather they are meant to reflect their individual subjective experiences as people in exile. In this way, the participants were able to choose the poems that most resonated with their own experiences and concerns. Moving to the research question slide. Karun, I'm very sorry for the background noise. It was very quiet earlier, I don't know what happened. I will try to move to to a quieter place. I think it's quiet here, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm terribly sorry for this. Karun, in his study of Pashto oral poetry, asks how much can we learn from this originally oral poetry that we do not already know from other sources. I think, I'm very sorry.
Lisa, are you still there?
There are two people moving from here, so they're going to leave soon.
Okay.
I'm very sorry. So, this question, I think this question is crucial in the context of the present study as well. When we treat Hazara women's oral poetry as data, I think it's particularly important to ask what can we learn from these poems that we could not learn from other sources in the context of this study from the life narratives of these women. Also, how do these women, as people in exile, relate and express themselves in these poems? And what are the literal and the intended verbal messages of these poems? And finally, how do these women interpret them, given that the interpretation is central to this study? In light of this question, I argue that Hazara women's oral poetry can be treated as literature from below that allows us to venture deep into the inner recesses of these women's individual subjective experiences that also reflect the collective experiences of Hazara women as a group. As an ethnically subaltern woman, Hazara women resorted to poetry as an alternative medium to communicate, contextualize, and memorialize their distinct experiences shaped by the intersection of their double subordinated ethnic and gender identities in the conflict-stricken history of Afghanistan. Not only do these poetries speak to the specific, historically rooted and contemporarily continued political, social, and cultural struggles of these women, but also shed light on their very personal hopes and aspirations that are not readily accessible in their life narratives. I also contend that above all else, Hazara women's oral poetry constitutes an epistemological resistance to the systemic exclusion in what constitutes Hazara epistemology. In arguing so, I am not making the claim that they are the result of conscious resistance on the part of these women, for it's not possible for me to substantiate such a claim. Rather, I assert that Hazara women utilize the traditional and cultural practices of oral or folk poetry to incorporate their individual subjective experiences, struggles, aspirations, thoughts, and feelings coded in the verses of these poems. More telling is the ubiquity of gender-specific subjective experiences and frustrations contained and communicated as verbal messages in these poems. I also argue that they represent an alternative. In making this argument, I state that they represent an alternative means of resistance to the forgetting, trivialization, and exclusion of their distinct experiences as ethnically subaltern women. Moving to the next slide. As I mentioned before, I will present two Quotian results in this presentation. So the first one is I would like to look into the significance of Damra oral poetry, because central to the participants' narratives, poetries, and as well as their interpretation is Damra. Damra is a musical instrument that is historically attributed to Hazaras, although it was traditionally played exclusively by Hazara male musicians and artists in Afghanistan and in exile. In recent years, Hazara women artists and singers, especially those in exile, have successfully circumvented this historically entrenched gender perception of the instrument. Contemporary Hazara male and female singers use the damra as their main musical accompaniment alongside other instruments. Also, Karimi, in his study of the significance or political significance of damra, states that half a century later today, damra music is not only socially acceptable among Hazaras, but it has also become a popular symbol of Hazara identity. The journey of damra music from a stigmatized and Islamic practice to a proud symbol of ethnic identity was long and rough. As you can see from the Quotian Ghazal, The ghazal, I'm going to just read the ghazal for you. The ghazal says that Allah ay dambura Allah ay robihi ranji taboram بگو از رازی که در سینه داری بگو از درد مردم دیارم. Translation is, O Lamburam, O my companion in the cave, who recount the sufferings of my ancestors. Speak to me of the secrets you hold in your heart. Speak to me of the torments of the people of my land. So as you can see in this quatrain, Ghazal, the poet evokes the above mentioned symbolic role and historical cultural significance of the dambura, not only as a musical instrument, but above all as a narrator of the historical and contemporary suffering of the people of her land. The reference to the instrument as a narrator of the pain of the people in itself reflects the political significance of the dambura for the group. What was interesting and also noteworthy was the fact that for the vast majority of participants, the instrument was an integral part of their connection to Hazaragi poetry, as was the way they perceived and defined their relationship and understanding of the poems. For some participants in the study, it was not the text of the poems that the musical sound of the dambura, and especially the melody of the song, that evoked resonance, connection, and relationship with the poems. To a certain extent, the dambura can be seen as the only point of connection between the participants and the orally transmitted Hazara poetry. The instrument also contributed significantly to the dissemination and thus the continued centrality of the poems among the Hazaras, both at home and in exile. Also, as you can see from the poem, the participants' interpretation that I mentioned before, that central to this study is the interpretation of the participants. So the participants, according to the interpretation of the participant, this poem speaks not only of the ongoing collective suffering of the Hazara people, but more importantly, of their unfulfilled hopes and aspirations to take upon themselves the burden of communicating the suffering to the world. Hopes that are not realized due to gender constraints in Afghanistan's patriarchal society. Historically, music and singing have been recognized exclusively as male professions, confining women's artistic and cultural contributions in the country to the private sphere. In the interpretation of this ghazal, however, the participant challenged this gender view by speaking of her desire to be able to play dambura as a Hazara woman, to express not only her long-lasting suffering, the collective pain of her people, a desire that is conventionally confined to the domain of men, prohibiting a woman from developing such culturally incompatible aspirations. She says that when she hears or recites this poem, it transports her to the Bamyan Valley, a Hazara inhabited province in central Afghanistan. She develops a deep longing to be in Bamyan, where she plays the dambura and expresses the pain of the people, a pain that acts as a unifying anchor between her and the people of her land. Moving to the next quatrain ghazal, which is exile and oral poetry. So exile and migration also constitute major themes in the oral poetry recited by the participants. These poetries reflect the participants' subjective experiences with regard to gender-specific hardships brought forth by exile and forced displacement. Displacement and exile is a constant yet fearful collective experience of the participants. Given the historical ethnic persecution of the Hazaras, coupled with decades of conflict in the country and their resultant enduring consequences, migration for this woman constitutes a survival strategy in the face of multifaceted adversities. And their stories, the participants also speak of what's interesting is that when they spoke to me, they share the economic, cultural, and social challenges that each phase of displacement brought upon them that is compounded. This is very important, and I would like to emphasize on this, that is compounded in the primary migrating countries due to their separation from their who have to migrate to the West, either to flee persecution or in search of a better life for their families. In the stories that remains obscure of the multifaceted sufferings that they had gone through is the emotional distress that they had to endure, precisely as a result of their separation from their husbands in exile. To put this simply, these women express themselves in relation, they see themselves, their sufferings in relational terms. They express their feelings and experiences in relation to others, such as their families or their broader community members. So this, by expressing like this, they hardly express themselves in terms of their own individual subjective sentiments and experiences that is not dependent upon the hardships experienced by those related to them. This relational perception has been one of the contributing factors to the abstraction of their expression and thus to an in-depth understanding of these women's individual subjective inner feelings about their experiences in the past. In a situation like this, oral poetry served a dual purpose. First, it afforded these women the language to verbalize and express their most intimate and personal emotional challenges that they have endured as a result of separation from their spouses. And two, it rendered their invisible world visible, making it intelligible to the listener or researcher. This dual purpose of oral poetry allows the listener to understand the innermost feelings of these women, feelings that speak to an intimate aspect of these women's experiences that could not be easily expressed or captured in the absence of poetry. Also, oral poetry allows the researcher to overcome this limitation and develop a holistic understanding of the participants' experiences. As you can see in the quadrant Rezaei shared by my other research participant, the quadrant Rezaei, I'm going to just read it for you. It's saying that سفر کردی، سفری دور کردی، خودت رفتی مرا ناجور کردی، خودت رفتی برای مال دنیا، دلم را خانه زنبور کردی. The translation is, you traveled to distant places, your departure made me ill-hearted, you left for economic reasons, I believe it is economic reasons, that's how I translated it, but I'm open to suggestions. Your departure left holes in my heart like a beehive. That is the translation. Now, just to briefly interpret this, so this poem, through this poem, the participant communicates her most personal feelings that is rooted in her separation from her husband. She talks about the pain and the anguish that the separation has caused her. This poem allows the audience to venture deep into the participant's inner world, the most personal sentiments into their heart. Through the imaginative authority of the poem, I, for example, as a listener and researcher, developed a bit of understanding of the personal emotional aspects of her experience during the period of estrangement from her spouse in exile. More importantly, a remarkable characteristic of poets that is noted by scholars is that they locate embodiment in the natural world for feelings and thoughts that affords the reader an illuminating tool to delve beyond words to the proximity of those feelings and thoughts. And then, as I mentioned about the poet, metaphorizes her pain as khane zambur, beehive. The metaphor embodies the utter pain and suffering that the participant had to endure in the absence of her husband.
Sorry.
I'm finishing in 1 minute, less than 1 minute. So Khane Zambur conceptualizes this specific experience from that particular time. This conceptualization of the experience not only captures and reflects the disparate part of the participant, but also allows the audience to develop a deeper insight into her very personal experience as a refugee woman, who, in addition to the burden of feeding her children, also struggled with the heartbreak of not having the companionship of her husband. I'm going to conclude here. So that's all from me. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you for the presentation.